And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program. And isn't that just one of the catchiest tunes that you've heard in a long time, if I do say so myself? And credit more for the groove, I think, goes to Biff Gore, who was on season 6 of The Voice. He's the guitarist, you see, and with that amazing voice, you can see why he got to, I think, the second battle round of that show. He laid down that rhythm, giving me some good space to join in on the harmonica. Good to be with you, one and all. Welcome to the show that makes sense out of nonsense each and every day, and we appreciate you being along for the ride, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, in partnership with our friends at the esteemed Washington Examiner. And by the way, today, our first guest coming up in just a matter of moments will be Anthony Leonardi, breaking news reporter at the Washington Examiner. We will catch up with Anthony about what's going on in terms of the stimulus package that many are calling it, relief package, whatever you want to label this $2 trillion bill. $2 trillion that Congress will be passing today. And that, as Larry Kudlow has pointed out, isn't even all the money we're talking about. In fact, and I'm going to shake this up on Nathan Matoush, doing the Matoush magic here today, our producer extraordinaire. But I want to actually play cut 3, because this is Larry Kudlow, who is chief economic advisor to the president, yesterday morning explaining the scope of this package beyond just the fact that we have $2 trillion that will be spent on support for businesses and especially support for individuals.
I want to be careful here because the president has put this out there, talked to a bunch of us. If we can target zones where the virus is less prevalent, things are safe. We're not abandoning the health professionals' advice, but there is a clamor to try to reopen the economy and perhaps I'll call it less of a shut-in. And so that's one piece. That's yet to be determined, but it's one piece that's being looked at. We still going to need the assistance because in the next week or 2 or 3, you're still going to have a lot of hot zones. You're still going to have shut-ins. There's no miracle here. We're not just flipping a switch. So the assistance is so vital. Let me tell you, it's $2 trillion program and $4 trillion of lending power from the Fed. That's a $6 trillion package. And by the way, the Fed can't act fully unless we pass phase 2, because phase 2 contains the increase in the exchange stabilization fund, which is the equity piece for the Fed lending. And So the U.S. government is the guarantor, not the Fed. So those two packages go together. $6 trillion, by the way, is about almost a third of the economy. It's a very big number and covers, as you know, small businesses, payrolls, unemployment, and so forth.
So that's Larry Kudlow yesterday morning. $6 trillion is what he's talking about here. Now, I understand a lot of that most definitely is necessary, but we will try to peel back the onion, as it were, with Anthony Leonardi on what the state of play is in Washington, D.C. right now as far as getting this through, some of the key components to it. We'll also talk to him, believe it or not, there is still a presidential campaign that is going on, although I guess it's gone virtual, as Joe Biden is talking about, a virtual campaign. And even virtually, Joe Biden has no shortage of blunders. So we'll be talking about that with Anthony Leonardi, again, breaking news reporter at the Washington Examiner. Then coming up in the following segment, the markets have been in for a wild, wild ride, a lot of negativity. Although yesterday, the Dow had its biggest gain since 1933, nearly 2,500 point rise for the Dow. I think it was 11% increase. And right now we are seeing, as of this broadcast, about 800 points higher on the Dow. Also, we're seeing positivity on the NASDAQ and S&P as we did yesterday. So stocks encouraged by what's happening right now in terms of the stimulus package, relief package, whatever you want to call it, that it looks likely that this will pass. Chris Burns is CEO of Dynamic Money, and he will join us to break down the market impact and get a sense for what's happening in the ebb and flow in this stock market right now. A phenomenal guest. You will enjoy hearing his insights on the markets, to be sure. And then we will wrap up today's edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads with Joel Griffith, who is a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. And he will join us to go over more specifically what's contained in this $2 trillion package. The good, the bad, the ugly. What is his sense for this legislation overall? We will dive in coming up in the fourth segment of the show. But today, we will continue to do what we've been doing so far here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, and we'll do into perpetuity, which is bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, saying style, but also delving in thoughtfully to the issues of the day and having some fun, too, while we are at it. That's why we have our original theme song with Biff Gore. And by the way, I should note, mixed and mastered, plus drums and bass by Scott Mitchell. Gotta love a good cooperative effort, and it was so much fun to do that theme song. But we like to have fun here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, and we will continue to do so day in and day out. In fact, that's why we have these video breaks, so we can keep you entertained when we go to a break. And that's exactly what we will do here in just one moment. But I want to remind you about a couple of places you can go for more information, to follow along with what I'm doing in the Washington Examiner, our partners as well. You can log on to my website, jimmysengenberger.com. Remember, there's no A, there's no I, there's no U in Sengenberger. It's all E's all the time. Once you know that, Sengenberger is easy. So jimmysengenberger.com, my website, there's a contact form there. You can also go to jimmyatthecrossroads.com and get links to all of our different pages and so forth. Plus, washingtonexaminer.com is the website for our partners at the Washington Examiner. And then on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel if you have not done so already. The Jimmy at the Crossroads channel on YouTube and on Facebook. Jimmy Sengenberger, media personality, is where you can go to like the page and follow me, and also make sure you don't miss a single edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. And also, by the way, follow our partners at the Washington Examiner on Facebook and also on YouTube. So with that, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we will be joined by none other than Anthony Leonardi, who is, of course, breaking news reporter at the Washington Examiner. We are just getting started. Keep it here. Welcome back to the Jimmy Sengenberger Show, your home for engaging, intelligent talk, same style, right here on News Talk 710 KNUS.
Please welcome Special Prosecutor Ken Starr.
Well, Judge, we've been spending a lot of time. You were on the radio for a full hour this morning with me.
And you were great, Jimmy. Everybody should tune in, regardless of where you live. He is terrific, and I also call him the harmonica man. He is really great with the harmonica. The law required me to provide you with this, but you can do anything you want to with it, including ignoring it.
I was 8 during the impeachment proceedings, Judge.
What a show-off.
I don't remember. Every time I talk with you, though, and I tell you this, you're a historical figure for me because I don't remember a day of the Clinton investigation and the impeachment proceedings and anything.
They let me out of the museum, so thank.
Good. That's why. Rumors of war with Iran and an outbreak of World War III are greatly exaggerated. The Arab world, Israel, all those relations are being rebuilt because of what President Donald Trump has been doing. Unfortunately, the federal government in the 1970s virtually ended bankruptcy protection for student loan borrowers. So what happens if the walking debt bites into your bank account so deeply that you become infected? There's no escape.
It's a lump of national debt following questionable economic growth. Here you go, millennials. Merry Christmas. Ho, 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 ho. It's coal.
Jimmy, your thoughts on this very quickly? Does this sap the energy away from the Democrat?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the whole nature of the impeachment proceeding at this point in time, the backdrop is significant. Just within the last month or so, you've had President Trump give the order to take out notorious terrorist Qasem Soleimani. He got through that democratically controlled House of Representatives, the USMCA trade agreement, and the economy is really robust. So I don't think this impeachment thing plays well for the Democrats.
If you want to reach millennials, you have to understand what the generation is about. That we're not all socialists. In fact, there are natural reasons to believe that millennials are more conservative than you think. Listeners have been asking for more engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style. And guess what, folks? We're going to bring it to you. We are just getting started. Stay with us. Don't go anywhere. Thank you.
Hi, Jimmy. This is Bill Clinton calling your secret hotline here. I gotta keep it down because I'm calling from the doghouse here in Chappaqua, New York at our place. Don't even ask. All you need to know is she's on the warpath again. Oh boy. Hillary yelled at me for listening to you. I have to do it in secret. But I really admire your show. I really do. I'm calling to wish you the best. All the best. In the future and even right now. Oh, here she comes. Listen, I gotta go, but you got a great show, and you're gonna do very well in the future. I'll tell you that much. Oh my God, I know it's gonna happen. She's gonna have me read chapters of her book again, put us both to sleep. I know what the title of her darn book should have been. Should have been called "How I Dropped the Ball on the 2-Yard Line with 3 seconds left in the Super Bowl." I gotta go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Great to be with you here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Such a pleasure and a privilege to have you along for the ride. Thanks for joining us. All right, let's set the stage here because this stimulus package, relief package, whatever you want to call it, the name, shorthand is the CARES Act. That is moving forward in Congress. Looks like it will be voted on today. And this is very interesting because what we're looking at here is a $2 trillion package pushed forward by Republicans who are notoriously talking about fiscal conservatism. So what's happening in D.C. in that regard, as well as on the presidential level when it comes to actually the presidential race that, believe it or not, it's still going on now in a virtual campaign sort of setting. To talk about all this, we're joined by Anthony Leonardi, who is a breaking news reporter at the Washington Examiner. Anthony, welcome back to the show. Good to have you here, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
So, Anthony, just kind of give us the overarching state of play in Congress right now.
Well, it certainly was a contentious one. I mean, after you initially saw this $8 billion deal that was the initial push. Secretary Mnuchin, or Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, has described each iteration of congressional action as innings, or phases rather. So the first deal that you saw then pass was the first inning, as he would describe it. And as Congress has taken actions going forward, these are iterative cures, so to speak, for the coronavirus. So this is just the latest phase. And this was a bit confusing going back and forth for the average person watching it, because Senator Mitt Romney was the initial person that said Americans need to have cash in their pockets immediately, and we do that by distributing $1,000 to every American. And Senate GOP seemed to be on board with that, and they released their own deal, while Pelosi and Secretary Mnuchin and others were negotiating their version of the deal. Counter to that, Speaker Pelosi in a Democratic-controlled House released their own plan, and Republicans said that this was a wish list, a Green New Deal, so to speak, for their constituency. It had strings attached to the bailouts that were provided. But as of early this morning, we saw Mitch McConnell say, finally, at last, we have a deal. And we don't know the specifics as to what the final Senate bill looks like. We do know that $500 billion is devoted to corporate relief. We do know that $250 billion is devoted to helping and assisting small businesses function during this economic situation. And there are other details that are soon to be coming, but for now we do know that Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, and others have finally made a deal. Now we'll have to see, once those details come out, how Speaker Pelosi and other Democrats in the House are going to react.
How do you think that the politics are going as far as Republicans right now moving forward with such an expansive piece of legislation?
Well, Jimmy, as you said in the beginning, there was concerns from conservative pundits about the vast scope of the bill. It is certainly one of the most expensive bailouts or relief bills or stimulus bills, however you prefer to call it, in the entire history of the United States Congress. So there were concerns voiced by conservative commentators about the scope and the longevity of government programs should they continue past the duration of the coronavirus. So you do see malleability on the side of Republicans to be able to address the immediate concerns of coronavirus. But there are others, such as Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who has taken a stand against Pelosi's bill, who he came out guns blazing, so to speak, against certain provisions for the strings attached to corporate bailouts in terms of emissions requirements, eventually for airline companies, and other sorts of pieces that he thought were more political. But right now, the concern is not necessarily fiscal conservatism. It is that we are in an immediate economic situation and public health emergency, and we need to treat the coronavirus pandemic, and we need to treat the immediate threat of a recession. It's not the talk is not how do we deter from some sort of long-term economic irresponsibility.
One thing that I'm curious about, since you mentioned the emissions requirements, obviously Speaker Pelosi was trying to add in all sorts of little items for her left-wing base in the Democratic Party into the legislation. Do we know yet how much of that was snuck into the bill that they're going to be voting on later today?
No, we don't know those details as it pertains to the agreement that Schumer and McConnell have made. We do know, though, that they were embedded within the House. So if the House bill is indicative at all about the between McConnell and Schumer, then people ought to be on the lookout on distributions to the Kennedy Performing Arts Center, for example, where tens of millions of dollars were allocated to there while it was underneath the title of a coronavirus relief bill. There was also areas that are allocated to NOAA, NASA, and others thought they're simply questioning online is how is this relevant to the immediate economic situation that we're in? How is this relevant to the immediate coronavirus pandemic? How do those distributions of funds work given the situation that we're in? And those are valid questions that lawmakers are going to be tasked with answering. So if there are any details that are indicative in the House bill of what's to come in the Senate bill, then people should keep an eye on things like that.
Anthony, when it comes to the unemployment checks, one of the concerns that some Americans have had is that they will not get to people in time to be put to use so they can pay bills and what have you, whether it's the unemployment checks going through the system or even this sort of kind of UBI, although, of course, they're means testing it, at least I think that they're still doing the means testing. You can correct me on that. But what about the speed with which this will actually get to Americans who are struggling to make ends meet right now?
Well, I mean, both the GOP and Democrats have said that they want cash to be in the hands of Americans now. They do have, concerns about how the money is going to be taken back in the future. A Politico reported that there was a counselor advising the GOP to say that, the money that is distributed to Americans can be later taken back. We don't know if something like that is in the Senate bill yet. We have to wait and see. But we do know that the GOP and the Democrats have indicated they want money to be in the pockets of Americans as soon as possible. So depending on the details, we'll likely expect something coming very soon. And this is also why you saw some people indicate their support for payroll tax reduction so that they could have more money in their pockets immediately come their next paycheck and going forward. But we have to wait and see the details. But we do know, based on the rhetoric of the GOP and the Democrats, that this is likely going to be very fast.
Then yesterday in his press conference, President Trump was asked about reopening the economy and his metrics. We're going to play cut one here and then talk about that, as well as this idea that the president is now putting forward that he would like to see packed churches on Easter Sunday. So here's a little bit of President Trump at his press conference yesterday.
Just looking at this idea of an Easter timeline, I don't know that's probably flexible. What are the metrics by which you will make the decision as to whether you can say, yes, we can open up this area of the country, or no, we can't open up that area? I mean, will you be looking at disease numbers? Will you be looking at possible containment, isolation?
I think we'll be looking at a lot of things. We'll also be looking again at very large portions of our country. And I will be guided very much by Dr. Fauci and by Deborah and by some of the other professionals that work with both of you. And we're going to see what will be. But that would certainly be, I think that's a goal that perhaps can happen, or at least for a very large portion of our country.
Anthony Leonardi from the Washington Examiner, tell us your thoughts on that exchange there. President Trump talking about reopening the economy, his metrics for it, and then also when it comes to this story about him wanting to see packed churches on Easter.
Well, members of the White House task force, such as Dr. Anthony Fauci, has asked the White House to be flexible with their set goal to allow Americans to resume their work schedule by Easter, which is April 12th. So there are people who are suggesting that things might not resume as the president desires by then. But in subsequent interviews and in a Fox News town hall event, the president was dedicated to his set goal of having it happen on Easter Sunday. And he said that Easter is a very special day to him. And he cited how Christians have not been able to enter and worship into churches and congregations physically for a while now. And Bill Hemmer actually picked up on his tune and said this would be a great American resurrection, alluding, of course, to the religious holiday celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So there are interesting spiritual allusions and also economic allusions tethered together on this one. People want to, most of the people that are supportive of the president hope and are optimistic that that can be a set date. But others, such as Dr. Anthony Fauci and other members of the White House task force, have asked the president to be flexible with that. So it is an interesting bit of optimism from the president. Whether or not that's going to actually happen is yet to be seen based on the curve of the infection rates that are going up. Per yesterday, it just exceeded 50,000 cases in America per the Johns Hopkins university counter. So we're seeing this incline go up rapidly. So if we see that rate begin to go down, then we could likely see an earlier retirement of the coronavirus lifespan. But as of now, the experts are saying that the White House should seek flexibility on that one set date.
Again, we're talking with Anthony Leonardi, who is breaking news reporter at the Washington Examiner, our partners here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Anthony, one more question on this topic, and then we'll shift to presidential campaign politics. When we look at members of Congress, there are increasing numbers that are in self-quarantine. I'm in Colorado. One of our senators, Cory Gardner's been in quarantine. We saw Rand Paul over the weekend become the first U.S. senator diagnosed with coronavirus, with COVID-19. So he went into quarantine. Senator Mitt Romney did so as well because he'd had close contact with Senator Paul. So several members of the Senate, as well as the House of Representatives, have been in self-quarantine. Have our elected officials in D.C. figured out some sort of a contingency plan or something to be able to vote while absent? Is there a way to do that they're looking at? What are we seeing as far as the state of play there? Because as of now, that's not permitted under the Constitution, or at least under current law.
That's a good question. There are Democratic lawmakers that have proposed provisions that would enable members of Congress to vote remotely. They have repeatedly called on Congress to do that on cable networks. We don't really see much momentum going in that direction. We see that many, such as McConnell, advocating for present person voting. So we can't necessarily speculate whether or not that's going to go anywhere. As you noted, there's a lot of hurdles before such a thing would be considered. So right now, I think that it's dependent upon members of Congress being present and able to vote on the measures going forward.
Again, Anthony Leonardi, our guest. Let's shift to presidential politics. Believe it or not, there is a presidential campaign that is going on right now, a virtual campaign, according to Joe Biden. He's now been doing interviews and so forth, I gather, from the basement of his home, not going out and about. Bernie Sanders still in this race, not giving any signs of dropping out. Where are things at on the Democratic side right now? I mean, I think it seems to be a foregone conclusion that the former vice president will be the Democratic nominee. At least he's ahead of Bernie, and there's no way that Bernie's going to be able to catch up. But we still got more primaries up ahead. And of course, the question is, are all of these going to happen? Will coronavirus interfere with that, with fulfilling those primaries? To what extent will they? Catch us up on the presidential campaign briefly, Anthony.
Yeah. So it's basically understood, before all these sort of quarantines and campaign rallies were suspended, that Joe Biden was going to be the presumptive nominee for the Democratic nomination for president. But right now, you're seeing a lot of states that are in fear of in-person voting, so they are delaying their primaries going forward to June or to sometime in the summer, where otherwise we would be having a lot more election results right now. So, those have been actually challenged legally. This happened in Ohio, where judges and the governor were at odds. The governor was saying that, this is a serious public health concern. We cannot have people be voting while the coronavirus is continuing to spread and the rate of infection is going up drastically. So, there have been state battles on these matters. DNC Chairman Tom Perez has said that he thinks that the primaries can stay on schedule. He has called for, universal vote by mail. So he hopes that, his constituencies, Democrats, going forward can vote via mail and allow the primaries to stay on schedule. But as of now, these states are seriously giving a lot of credibility to the public health concern that the coronavirus poses to their, residents, and have decided to postpone their primaries.
So, in terms of the virtual campaign, how are candidates Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden addressing this from that virtual way? I know I saw that Joe Biden's done some interviews. We saw him do an interesting, we've got a little snippet that we'll show in a minute, but an interesting event where he was speaking on teleprompter didn't go so well. But then also we're seeing Bernie Sanders, by the way, did a fireside chat last week. How are these candidates working in the virtual world at this moment?
Yes, so Biden has been one that has been typically doing interviews from, like, as you said, the basement of his home seemingly, and has been doing views with ABC's The View, with CNN's Jake Tapper and others. And you know, there have been some humorous moments where he has coughed during the interview, and Jake Tapper had to correct him that this is how you actually are supposed to cough. You're supposed to cough into your arm rather than into your hand. So there have been some moments of levity there, but as you said about Bernie Sanders, it's interesting that he's labeling these things fireside chats. He's actually, you know, doing it, I think, in the mold of FDR to sort of give this image that, you know, his progressive far left agenda is the iteration of FDR, and he's attempting to, in a moment of crisis, as FDR did, attempt to, you know, convey his message and his, you know, solutions to the people. So that seems to be an intentional political strategy from him. But Joe Biden has had a couple virtual town halls where there have been typical Biden gaffes, as we've seen, such as him just walking off camera at one point, and then the camera feed having to switch back to his logo, and other moments like that. So the candidates have been handling things differently: virtual town halls, interviews with cable news, and other times just fireside chats with an intentional political strategy.
I want to play a montage clip here. This is cut 5, and it is former Vice President Joe Biden. Just the last 2 or 3 days, some of his bumbles and fumbles on the virtual campaign trail.
And in addition to that, we have to make sure that we are in a position that we are. Well, let me go to the second thing. I've spoken enough of that.
Are you at all concerned, as Trump said, that we cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself?
We have to take care of the cure. That will make the problem worse no matter what. Do that. Why doesn't he just act like a president? That's a stupid way to say it.
You know, Donald Trump was asked on.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I probably best I don't. I just can't figure the guy. I don't know. It's like watching a yo-yo. I shouldn't have said it that way. It's like watching.
It feels that way. I want to ask. That's okay. I want to ask you.
No, I've not talked to any individual. Excuse me.
You know, you're supposed to cough into your elbow. I don't know, sir. I learned that actually covering your White House.
Actually, that's true. But fortunately, I'm alone in my home. But that's okay.
All right.
I agree. You're right.
You should it's kind of old school to do it with your hand. Do it into your elbow. You're supposed to.
Excuse me, Anthony Leonardi, what did you take away from those exchanges just in the last couple of days here? And he's at home, by the way. It's not like he's worn out on the campaign trail.
I mean, it's certainly one of those moments where you can't help but laugh. His analogies weren't necessarily descriptive of perhaps the point that he was trying to make about, you know, the yo-yos and other times. So I think that most voters are going to react to this and say that this sort of just reinforces their image of Biden as a candidate. You know, if you saw in that one moment, for example, Vice President Biden was speaking in the teleprompter and his hand was actually moving up in an up and down motion, indicating that something might have been gone wrong with the teleprompter. It wasn't necessarily, you know, a misstep in his flow, a logical flow in his mind. But I do think that these are just sort of the things that reinforce this image that, you know, Biden has a weakness, and it has to do with, you know, as you've seen online, it being called cognitive decline. So that is sort of reinforcing the image I think that voters are going to see, and they're going to have to reconcile that with their image of Trump. And I think that, you know, based on his re-election campaign and his strategy going forward against Biden, we'll have to see how he's going to reinforce that image to the public.
It will be fascinating to see how his virtual campaign goes and if it continues on the same trajectory as everything else, just from the way he conducts interviews and speeches and so forth. But Anthony Leonardi, breaking news reporter at the Washington Examiner, our partners here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, thanks so much for rejoining us. Great to talk with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Just one of many examples of great reporters and commentators at the Washington Examiner. Thanks for joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to delve into the markets and what we're seeing going on economically and how that's impacting, and the stimulus package, relief package, whatever you want to call the CARES Act, how that is impacting the stock market, what you should keep in mind. We'll be joined for that discussion by Chris Burns, CEO of Dynamic Money. As we continue, I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. You're watching Jimmy at the Crossroads.
To Obamacare.
Pardon me.
Oh, hey, you must be Freddie Mae.
Frederick, please.
Yeah, whatever. Hey, listen, I'm Bill O'Goods with OSLAP. That's Obama's Student Loan Acceleration Program. And we just passed Obamacare, right? We're about to pass another bill to nationalize student loans. It's going to be a whole federal takeover.
Excuse me, sir. Could I get you a drink?
Yes. Do you have a Lady Gaga?
Of course. One moment, please.
How does this benefit SCALP, the Society of College Academics for Loan Proliferation?
Well, I'm glad you asked. More loans equals more money. That's more money for everybody. You could raise your tuition excrementally in perpetuity forever, and there's nothing they can do about it. You still got to go to school, right? You still got to get a loan. You ain't got no money. It's a win-win. Oh, and here's another thing. You can't discharge student debt by bankruptcy. You could have 3 student loans. You could go you can't declare bankruptcy on any of them. I don't care how much money you don't got.
But what about the students?
The who? Remember, my friend, here at OSLAP, we make money the old-fashioned way. We steal it from the students. This is for you.
So what you're saying is, this is a gold mine.
Indeed it is.
A gold mine.
A gold mine.
Stop! Let me tell you what's really going on with student loan debt today. You see, in 2010, President Barack Obama nationalized the student loan system, tying it to Obamacare. At that point in time, student loan debt across the country totaled $800 billion. Now, about a decade later, that number has doubled to $1.6 trillion. This is particularly because the federal government keeps giving out the loans, which has allowed colleges and universities to blithely increase their tuition without any concern. And the federal government just keeps giving out the loans because guess what? If you're a borrower who's deeply indebted with student loan debt, you cannot discharge that debt in bankruptcy. You're stuck with it for life. That needs to change, particularly because there's no risk to the lender. That means the federal government can keep giving out loans, and also there's no risk to the colleges and universities. So they'll just keep raising tuition regardless. There really does need to be a congressional action done to address this student loan crisis in America. And at the Millennial Policy Center, we have some great extensive research on how to do this, including some bills working their way through Congress. So log on to millennialpolicycenter.org today to learn more.
Right on.
Well, it's going to be a pretty good decade.
Well, I think it'd be good.
Freddie, let's have another.
Oh, let me just.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler. The captain finds himself up against a worthy adversary, a meteor maid.
Oh, come on. I was only in there 2 parsecs.
You can't double park here. You're in a twilight zone.
I didn't see the signpost up ahead.
Plus, your plates are expired.
Hold on. I've got an idea. This is not the double-parked starship you are looking for.
This is not the... Oh, come on, really? You're gonna try and pull mind tricks? What do I look like, a Gungan?
Misa thought it would work.
Here you go, Captain Schnook.
Ah, womp rats. A summons?
See you in court.
You mean I gotta come back all the way across the galaxy? Oh, look. This is right in the middle of Ponfar. And if I miss it, it's another 7 years.
Tough tribbles.
Well, was the captain really parked in a Twilight Zone? Will there be a twist ending? Tune in next time when we hear...
Look, maybe we can, work something out.
What do you have in mind?
A couple passes to the Space of Palooza Festival, free parking.
I will see you in court. You will pay in full. Sign here, please.
You will see me in court. I will pay in full. I have signed here.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
What the How does she do that?
On Starship
Winkler.
Do you wear a toupee? Do you yell out, Spock? Do you put in pauses when you talk? Do you start real soft and then go real loud? Have you won 2 Emmys? Do you love a crowd?
Whatever makes you feel like a Shatner. Yeah, you got lots of macho and swagger. You had alien affairs. You sing bad but no one cares. You find low airline fares. If you like to work, got a handsome smirk. If you're Captain Kirk, whatever makes you feel like a...
Me. Phases on stunning.
Me at the Crossroads, good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. So unfortunately, it turns out that Chris Burns just got the note, is unable to come on the program. So in just a moment, we will bring on Nathan Matoush to ask me a couple of questions. He is Matoush Magic, our producer extraordinaire. But first, I just want to make a comment because we're seeing massive ebb and flows in the markets. When we see a stock market swing one way or the other, it's noticeable. That is to say, yesterday we had, I think nearly 2,500 points up on the Dow, 11%, the biggest single day gain since 1933 on a percentage basis. Pretty remarkable when you think about it. Today, nearly 1,000 points up on this stimulus relief bill, whatever you want to call the CARES Act, as it's named. But we had seen a precipitous decline in the markets as a result of concerns economically over what's happening with the coronavirus scare across the country, particularly because of governments around the nation, states, municipalities, taking initiatives to say, stay at home unless you are considered essential in the workforce, in which case you can continue to go to work, but maybe at depressed levels of people who are there, so you can't have as many people at your job sites and what have you. And so this is putting a real squeeze on the economy, and investors have been very, very concerned about the trend downward. Now we're seeing it upward. And what's so interesting in my view about all of this is when we look at the economy here, we're seeing it very tenuous for sure. But then we see the stimulus, this relief package, on its way to be approved by Congress, and investors bring up the markets noticeably. So my guess is that the stock market, once things do start to kick back in, will rise quickly. It won't take much time for the markets to respond favorably to a positive economic climate, and that should be very encouraging. The question is how much longer this will last, and of course, President Trump has been giving indications that he would like to see the economy opened up again by Easter. Nathan Matoush, a.k.a. Matoush Magic, is our producer extraordinaire here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, and I thought we'd turn the tables a little bit and give him the opportunity to ask me a couple of questions. Matoush, how are you today?
Doing great, Jimmy. Ready for round 3
You're at Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Yeah, coming on again all week. You've had some little appearance, and I appreciate it. So, sort of what's on your mind here, Nathan Matoush? What do you want to ask me?
Well, I think the main question is we saw Donald Trump say yesterday, President Trump, that he plans on opening the economy back up Easter Sunday, which is perfect timing considering it's a great holiday around the United States here as we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Do you think that the United States is going to be ready to open things back up and go back to semi-normal life in the country by Easter Sunday?
Well, let's play a couple of cuts before I answer that. And cut one, and I think it's a great question, in cut one, you have President Trump yesterday, and we played this earlier with, actually before Anthony Leonardi. And let's watch cut one where President Trump yesterday answers the question on his thoughts about reopening the economy by Easter.
Just looking at this idea of an Easter timeline, and I don't know that's probably flexible, what are the metrics by which you will make the decision as to whether you can say, yes, we can open up this area of the country, or no, we can't open up that area? I mean, will you be looking at disease numbers? Will you be looking at possible containment, isolation?
I think we'll be looking at a lot of things. We'll also be looking again at very large portions of our country. And I will be guided very much by Dr. Fauci and by Deborah and by some of the other professionals that work with both of you. And we're going to see what will be. But that would certainly be, I think that's a goal that perhaps can happen, or at least for a very large portion of our country.
And then Dr. Fauci, this is cut two. Dr. Anthony Fauci, I think, is the guy that Americans look to for comprehensive information, for details that we can trust about the science of all this. I called him the other day the most trusted man in America, at the very least, when it comes to coronavirus. And so here's Dr. Fauci specifically asked right after President Trump made that remark. He was asked for his thoughts on this possible timeline for opening the economy back up by Easter.
We just had a conversation with the president in the Oval Office talking about, you know, you can look at a date, but you got to be very flexible. And on a literally day-by-day and week-by-week basis, you need to evaluate the feasibility of what you're trying to do. And, John, you asked for, you know, what kind of metrics, what kind of data. When you look at the country, I mean, obviously, no one is going to want to tone down things when you see what's going on in a place like New York City. I mean, that's just, you know, good public health practice and common sense. But the country is a big country, and there are areas of the country, and I refer to this in my opening remarks, that we really need to know more about what the penetrance is there. So if we do the kind of testing what we're doing, and testing will always be associated by identification, isolation, and contact tracing, and you find after a period of time that there are areas that are very different from other areas of the country, you may not want to essentially treat it as just one force for the entire country, but look at flexibility in different areas. So I think people might get the misinterpretation, you're just going to lift everything up, and even somebody's going like that. That's not going to happen. It's going to be looking at the data. And what we don't have right now, that we really do need, is we need to know what's going on in those areas of the country where there isn't an obvious outbreak. Is there something underneath the surface that says, wait a minute, you better be careful and really clamp down? Or what looks there that you don't really have to be as harsh as you are in other areas. So it's looking at information that up to this point, John, we never had. So it's a flexible situation.
I think that is entirely consistent, Nathan Matoush, with President Trump's position that he would like to see the economy opened up by Easter Sunday. But that doesn't mean that it's going to happen or that it's going to happen everywhere around the country. I think Fauci was expressing that sentiment, this idea that maybe it's possible. We basically have to go with the data as far as the federal government saying, yes, states, we encourage you to do this in this circumstance or that circumstance. I don't think, for example, that New York City will find themselves opened back up anytime soon, because that's where we are seeing, that's the epicenter now. It is spreading like wildfire, sadly, in New York City. Hospitals seem to be increasingly overrun. But I would like to see this happen. I don't think that the American economy can be shut down beyond Easter Sunday. Now, whether that means that by Easter people should be packing churches, as President Trump suggests, well, that would be nice in theory. it probably wouldn't be such a good idea at that point to encourage people to just pack the churches, and that means they're right next to each other and possibly spreading coronavirus even more from those people who, at that point, maybe still have some sort of an infection of COVID-19. So while I don't know about packing churches, I do think that there is a case to be made that by the Easter holiday and by Passover, that the American economy will be able to open up more. And by the way, I think if we could go play cut 4, this is Larry Kudlow, Chief Economic Advisor, asked by media about this idea of opening up by Easter and so forth. He explains why this is of value, and I think he hits on a very important point I want to underscore.
Is it worth opening up the economy at the expense of public health?
I don't see it that way. I think that public health includes economic health. That's the key point. And it's not either or. It's not either or. And that's why we're taking a fresh look.
In other words, public health and economic health are not mutually exclusive. And I think he's right there, Nathan, because there's more to life than just getting up in the morning, going to bed at night after eating food during the day. You know, if you're not able to go live your life in any way, shape, or form, especially if you have a purpose that's tied to a business that you run or where you work, you can't just be holed up and expected to go out only to jog once a day and keeping 6-foot distance from your spouse. Otherwise, like in Denver, Colorado, you might get fined $999. Like, this sort of thing I don't think is sustainable. Striking a balance is important. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I think the big question that we have to ask ourselves is, it might be okay to open up, to semi-open up the economy, but is it safe for us to go out into public areas? And I think a big thing to look at is President Trump and Dr. Fauci on the same page? And it looks like they are, to be honest. So I think it's a good sign that the two of them are on the same page. And, maybe it is time to open up the economy. But like you were saying, I still think we're not at that point yet where we can crowd people, with churches on Easter Sunday. I'm just not sure if that's really going to be able to happen. But the good news is Dr. Fauci and President Trump, they look like they're on the same page. They've worked close together within this past month. And like you're saying, Dr. Fauci, I think the American people really trust him. But the cut that we were just playing with Kudlow there, he's got a point. The economic health and the public health are two very separate categories. Well, so I think this is still a question right now.
What Kudlow was saying, Nathan, I think was more, they're not two separate categories. It's that they go hand in hand. I mean, look, and President Trump has made this point. It's a difficult one, but it is a valuable one to keep in mind, is that if you are kept in isolation, you are not able to engage much with other people, kept in your home, you aren't able to go be productive, to live your life, to go out and enjoy things, or to work. I mean, this is so much of an important thing to keep in mind, that there are a lot of people who, sure, they work and they just work because they have to work, but there are a heck of a lot of people, I'm among them, who love what we do and want to keep doing what we're doing. They run businesses or they help start businesses, and they want to succeed in those enterprises. And the idea that you can just rip that away from people for months on end just doesn't sit as being logical so much to me. And then also keep in mind that the emotional toll that isolation and that separation from your livelihoods and your productivity, if you are engaged in what you're doing and you're not just working because you have to work, but you have a purpose in your life and you're not able to fulfill that for months on end, you could see mental health issues ramp up even more than we already are seeing and have seen across the country. I don't think mental health issues have been addressed very well here in the United States, particularly because of social stigma. And so if you amplify that by isolating people, separating them from their livelihoods, from their lives, from their families, from their friends, you can only do that for so long. And so I think Larry Kudlow's absolutely right, because that's part of economic health, is really being able to live your life, period. More than just being, is doing, is being active, not just surviving, but also thriving. What do you think?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, like you said, it might be time to get back to normal routine.
Well,
To
not
normal
yet.
routine right
Not
now.
yet.
I mean, not quite yet as going out into like crowded areas, but like President Trump said, opening up the economy at that time frame.
If the
maybe it's time.
science, as Fauci has said, if the science demonstrates that it's okay in these various areas, I mean, I don't like, look, we're here in Aurora, Colorado, and they're about to be putting more restrictions in this town. It is the third largest city in Colorado. Denver started this. Now, Jared Polis, governor of Colorado, said on Sunday, no, we're not going to shut down the economy here across the state. We are allowing individual communities to make those decisions. Well, Denver did it on Monday and said we are going to shut down effective 5 p.m. on Tuesday. And then other parts of the state starting to follow suit, falling like dominoes. I don't think that every state needs to have a complete economic shutdown. I think a lot of people are abiding by the restrictions that have been put in place, the recommendations that have been put forward as well. And I think it makes sense to allow some semblance of the life to continue here. And that's important to keep in mind because, look, we're talking about a situation that is ongoing and tenuous in some ways and subject to changes here and there. So why don't we play a cut here, as I see we have a little bit of technical issues going on we're trying to work out. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about cut 7, Dr. Fauci talking about private corporations stepping up their manufacturing. Again, this is cut 7 as we continue on Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Well, I mean, as yesterday in the press conference that I'm sure you heard, what the president was saying is that these companies are coming forth on their own. And I think that's an extraordinary spirit of the American spirit of not needing to be coaxed. They're stepping forward. They're making not only masks, but PPEs and now ventilators. So what we're going to be seeing, and we're seeing it already. In the beginning, obviously, there was an issue with testing. The testing now, a large number of tests are available now out there, because the private companies have gotten involved.
But like the mayor of New York has said this week that he was going to run out of medical equipment in a matter of 2 weeks.
Right, that's
so
true.
When will it is true he will run out? Will the federal government get him what he needs?
True, to both of them. Let me explain. We were at the task force meeting yesterday, and it was very clear that the issue in New York was right on the front burner. And the situation is now that the resources that are being marshaled are going to be clearly directed to those hotspots that need it most. And clearly that's California, Washington State, and obviously New York is the most hard hit. So not only is New York trying to get resources themselves, but we're going to be pouring it in from the federal government. So it will be a combination of local and federal.
So just a couple of quick points. First of all, I think it's important to keep in mind that the Trump administration is, again, looking at the science for their recommendations. They're not just saying, hey, we need to open the economy, so open it back up. That's why Easter is still a few weeks away. So it's not like it's in a few days. So there's some time here in terms of making that determination, which I think is valuable. You need to have that time. But also, communities and states should be making their own decisions. I was glad when Governor Polis in Colorado, where, again, we are broadcasting from, when he said on Sunday, we're not going to shut down the state economy in this wide way. I think that was good. Then Mayor Hancock of the largest city in Colorado makes his decision, and all the dominoes start falling in other communities. So there are some parts of the country where I think you can do that. There are others where maybe you need to have a more concerted effort to keep people a little bit more constrained, although I am concerned about some of the extent of the talks. But going to what Dr. Fauci said, I think this is a very important point that Fauci was making, is that there are a lot of Democrats like Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York who are saying corporations need to essentially be nationalized right now under the Defense Production Act and forced to make ventilators, forced to make masks and so forth. Well, look, as Fauci's pointed out and others, for example, there's an editorial in the Wall Street Journal to this effect, right now companies are stepping up. They're taking the initiative, and you don't need to add in a new layer of government force when the private sector is working more diligently to meet the demand. Now, it's not where it needs to be. Make no mistake about it, but they're starting to really ramp up production, which I think is crucial, including for tests and ventilators and masks and more. So if the private sector is stepping up, we don't need to have the government add some sort of force mechanism like the Defense Production Act and start actually implementing that. Thank you, Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire. Appreciate you joining us here today and your good work.
Oh, yeah, of course, Jimmy.
Especially right now.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, and you know, we're still figuring out technical kinks here and there, and you're doing a great job with that, so I appreciate it. All right, we're going to run to a break here, and when we come back, we will talk with Joel Griffith, who is a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. We will get his thoughts on what's going on here on Jimmy at the Crossroads in just one moment, actually. We're not quite ready with the video break, so we'll get that queued up here and get rolling with it in just one moment. So let me make an additional point then about this stimulus package to kind of set the stage for our conversation with Joel Griffith in the next segment, and that would be this. It's a heck of a lot of money. There's some good in it. There's some bad in it. There's some ugly in it. Big question, does the good outweigh the bad and the ugly? In other words, should they for sure pass this legislation today? How do you do that balancing act? Keep that question in mind as we go to a break and then return here on Jimmy at the Crossroads with yours truly, Jimmy Sengenberger, in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Jimmy at the Crossroads, stay with us.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
The Middle East is a complex and complicated place. What's remarkable right now is how the Trump administration has come in with a very fresh perspective and put forward a plan to achieve peace through prosperity. Previous administrations had always focused on trying to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and then normalizing relations between Israel and the broader Arab world. Well, the Trump administration has kind of turned that idea on its head, Jared Kushner, Jason Greenblatt, and others, and have been working behind the scenes to bring the Arab powers, especially in the Gulf, together with Israel and really get their buy-in and support and build those relations out more and then be able to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
But if President Trump goes ahead with his policies of strengthening the economy on the West Bank and even in Gaza, despite the presence of Hamas there, I think the people's attitude will change to the positive and would be more likely to accept a peace accord between them and the Israelis.
So in the economic part of the plan, they want to raise $50 billion of foreign direct investment into the Israeli, the Palestinian economy, and then also the Lebanese, Jordanian, and Egyptian economies so that there can be more integration broadly between all of those. But they want to provide the capital necessary for businesses to flourish, for job creation. They're doing this across all sectors of the economy. They're also trying to work on governance issues, property rights, rule of law, things like that, so that the investments can be safe and the investors can rest assured that their investment is protected.
How do you think the economic prosperity that this plan would hopefully bring about could disincentivize millennials and younger people who are in the Middle East from starting
to get involved in terrorist groups in the future?
I mean, the State Department, the government's done many research studies, and it's pretty conclusive that terrorist groups thrive where there's poverty, where there's low education, low literacy rates. They thrive on preying on people like that to enlist them in their cause of Allah or whatever they're claiming to stand for. So the more we can expose them to education, increase the literacy rates, increase the economic opportunities, the less likely they are going to want to join these terrorist organizations. When we present these business opportunities, and they just see that peace is going to be a all-around better solution for them to work between the Israelis and the Arabs working together, they're going to see it's going to create a more prosperous future.
As I talk to Arabs and Israelis, friends of mine, there is a changing attitude among both of them, and God willing, there will be peace with the economic policies and the strong foreign policy by the Trump administration.
To learn more and watch our full documentary featuring more in-depth insights on this unique approach to achieving peace in the Middle East, click on the link below to our website, millennialpolicycenter.org.
Do you wear a toupee? Do you yell out, spark? Do you put in pauses when you talk? Do you start real soft and then go real loud? Have you won 2 Emmys? Do you love a crowd?
Whatever makes you feel like a Shatner. Yeah, you got lots of macho and swagger. You had alien affairs. You sing bad but no one cares. You find low airline fares. If you like to work, got a handsome smirk. If you're Captain Kirk, whatever makes you feel like a
Me. Phasers are stunning. Whatever makes you feel like a Shatner.
Whatever makes you feel like a Shatner.
I told you we like to have a little bit of fun, mix things up here on Jimmy at the Crossroads with yours truly, Jimmy Sengenberger. So great to be with you on this Wednesday, March 25th, the day on which it looks like the CARES Act, whether you want to call it a stimulus package, a relief package, whatever the name is you want to give it or nickname here, it looks likely that it will pass at least the United States Senate today. Now, how about that bill and what it entails, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and how is it all looking? To talk about this, I am pleased to welcome here to Jimmy at the Crossroads our last but not least guest for this edition of the program. Joel Griffith is a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, one of America's leading conservative organizations, and I'm so pleased to welcome him to the show. Hello, Joel. How are you?
Hey, doing well, and that's a great open you've got there.
Thank you. You enjoyed that. See, one of the things we like to do on Jimmy at the Crossroads here is have a little bit of fun, spice some things up. Our show open is an original theme song that includes yours truly playing harmonica. Especially during these tense times, I think we need a little bit of levity and fun.
I think you're right.
So, Joel, let's start with the beginning, which is what this bill, the CARES Act, $2 trillion entails, and then we'll get into some analysis of it and how you view it.
Wow, and get this, the Senate still has not voted on it.
Right.
Hopefully the vote will happen today, and possibly the House will pass it later tonight. And I was just listening to Governor Cuomo of New York, and he's actually seems to be in opposition to it because he doesn't think it spends enough. In New York, we're talking about a bill that might end up spending more than $2 trillion. It's just an astounding number. And yes, there's a lot in there. I don't know if anyone has read it from front to back. I mean, it is the length of several novels, but we could definitely unpack some of that for you today.
Well, but Joe, my understanding is the text may not even be completed yet. They're still ironing things out, which is striking when we're talking about a $2 trillion bill just from the federal government, congressional, and executive branch side. Then you add in, what, $4 trillion in liquidity efforts for the Federal Reserve, according to Larry Kudlow, in a phase 2. This is just the first part. We're talking a lot of trillions of dollars, Joe Griffith.
Yes, there are. Now, there's some parts of this package that are better than others. There's some parts that are absolutely atrocious. Maybe we should start with a few of the good things.
Yes, I was thinking of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Go ahead with the good.
Well, here's some of the good. And even the good is not necessarily the best, but it's still better than other options. So there's a component in here that will greatly expand unemployment benefits for those that are laid off in the coming months. At the Heritage Foundation, we had a version of that wouldn't be in the form of unemployment benefits. Our version would have been give companies tax credits, compensate those companies to keep people on the payroll, even if they're not working, even if they have to go home and can't work remotely. And the goal of that was, sure, it's going to cost us a lot of money, but at least when the economy gets going again in the next month or hopefully 2 months, people will be able to go back to their former employers. This bill, what it does is focus on providing bigger unemployment benefits that instead of making, say, a fraction of what you're earning, it would actually pay you up to $1,000 per week over a period of several months. As far as bailouts go, this is one of the, this is not such a, it's not the worst of ideas. We want to make sure that our aid is temporary, that it's direct, that it goes to those most directly impacted. And that seems to meet those qualifications. I just wish it would have been done in a manner that keeps people attached to their workplace so that when we get up and running, people go back to work instead of possibly being incentivized to stay at home, because this would allow benefits to continue for 4 months. But that's one component of this plan. All in all, this at least stops people from getting thrown out on the streets through no cause of their own. There's another component of this that deals with small business loans through the SBA, the Small Business Administration, that smaller employers could get through their banks. And there's a component of this that looks like would allow companies to keep people on the payroll, like I was discussing a second ago. And if they do that, some of those loans would be forgiven. Once again, this is a drastic times. A lot of these companies are not allowed to operate through no fault of their own. They can't. The government is not allowing them to operate. And so this is something, even I'm comfortable. I know this might cost me a little extra, but at least this is targeted, it's temporary, and it goes to those businesses that are impacted most. So that's, and one other good, there's one other third good thing in this bill, and that would allow companies to roll back losses from this quarter and next quarter to prior years. This is an alternative to a bailout. If you have a loss now, you paid taxes before, go ahead and apply that to prior profits, and you can get some cash from the government as a tax refund.
That is an interesting provision, to be sure. I, Joe Griffith, was favorable to the idea of providing unemployment benefits to furloughed workers in addition to those who literally could not work because they were out of a job, completely laid off, but also wanting to have the ability to provide support to employers to keep workers tied to their employers. So you kind of do both, because sometimes there may be some employers that just couldn't work out for in terms of being able to stay in operation even with some support. I mean, the tax credit, wouldn't that be delayed in terms of the money that you would be able to get to apply to workers? I mean, tax credit, would the money come in the form of cash payments to businesses the way that you guys were structuring it? How would that have looked?
Yeah, it's a great question, because you're right. Those tax credits usually take a period. It could be over a month. We envisioned a way in which these credits would actually be flowing in, improvised every few weeks, so that would basically match payroll. That was our goal with that.
Now, as far as loans, though, because I do see whether it's the Federal Reserve, the Small Business Administration, small, medium, large-size companies, we're looking at low or no interest loans. What do you think about that, especially for the larger corporations? Because it does seem to be that the problem we've got economically right now, more than anything, is liquidity, the ability for companies to have cash to pay their employees, keep them working, or at least keep the payroll going, even if they're not able to go to their job places and what have you. So what is your take on the liquidity issue and how they're looking at it in this bill?
Yeah, so prior to this bill, we saw the Federal Reserve actually take a lot of positive actions towards liquidity. And by liquidity, we need to be, we're not talking about just giving money willy-nilly to everybody. We're talking about for companies that are solvent, that have assets, we want to make sure that they're able to get their hands on cash to pay suppliers, to pay employees. And in a time of extreme crisis where there's such a demand for cash, sometimes that cash can actually dry up, even if you're creditworthy, even if you have a company with a lot of assets. Sometimes that dries up. So the Federal Reserve took a lot of efforts to go ahead and lower rates that they were paying banks to keep money back. So banks are incentivized to lend, and lowering the reserve requirements actually to about zero at these banks so that they could go ahead and lend money out to businesses that need it. Those are all positive. Same thing that goes with this focus in the legislation with the SBA, the Small Business Administration, making sure that these companies that are solvent, that can show that they were on solid footing before, we want to make sure that we help them survive. This is an unusual circumstance. Where this legislation takes a detour from all that, though, and it's very troubling, are these bailouts. We're talking tens of billions of dollars of not just the loans, but in effect, grants are going to be made to big select corporations and select industries. We're talking aviation and transportation. And of course, they're saying, well, these are essential. What they're not saying to the public and explaining is that these companies are so large, so big, that they can find ways to fund this in the private sector and in the bond markets. They might have to pay some additional money in the term of interest, but what they're trying to do for these select companies, unlike the small businesses, they're trying to basically give them a check to cover all these payroll expenses and a lot of overhead. And this is going to be in the form of basically forgivable grants at the end of the day that all of us are going to be paid for. And we got to remember, we're all going to be somewhat negatively impacted by this crisis. And that does mean let's go ahead and direct that aid to those that are impacted most. That's something I think hopefully all of us are comfortable with. But in this situation, we're talking about picking out a few businesses to be the big winners here, and we're basically going to comp all of that payroll expense, at least to the tune of possibly $200 billion. Yeah. I don't think that's fair. That's not right.
To your point, Joe Griffith, again, research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, I want to read a quote from Boeing CEO David Calhoun to Fox News yesterday on the subject of if the government would force, for example, as part of this bill, an equity stake So the idea is that if some of these corporations were to get this kind of money that you're talking about, that the government may get an equity stake, partial ownership of those companies. Now, that's something that the Democrats have been pushing for and talking about. And he said, quote, if that happens, quote, then we just look at all the other options and we've got plenty of them. What's striking to me, and this goes to the point of Nikki Haley, former UN ambassador and former governor of South Carolina, who left the Boeing board because she didn't think that Boeing should get this kind of financial support. Here's a company that's saying, well, if they're going to do an equity stake, then we can find other options, but we'll take the money if you give it to us because it's going to be better for Boeing. That strikes me as getting the core of what you're talking about, Joe.
Yeah, this is almost a taxpayer heist, I should say, and it's something that's been done completely lawfully. And of course, we have the right to lobby our government, and that's wonderful. But this is happening, and I don't even see a lot of outrage on the part of a lot of regular folks. But I have a feeling that's because a lot of us outside of the world, I'm fortunate, I get to focus on this for a living. But a lot of people, they're trying to still earn a living right now and care for their families and care for the loved ones. And in the dead of night, we're seeing something like this pass that just gives away hundreds of billions of dollars towards one favored sector, while the rest of us, we just have to make do. We need to realize, for all of these bailouts, even the ones that we might support. And like I said, I support helping those that are unemployed. I'm in favor of helping out some of these small businesses with some of these terms to the Small Business Administration. But all of this comes at a cost, either in the form of higher taxes or higher inflation, because we're borrowing trillions of dollars and we're printing a lot of money. And we got to always remember there's a cost attached to all of these programs. And we need to weigh that as we make our decisions as far as which ones we support.
Well, one thing for me, as you are, we're both limited government guys. We don't like these sort of expansive government programs. I do believe, though, that there is a role for the federal government to provide economic assistance because, like it or not, this coronavirus crisis is here, forcing many governments across the country to take actions we never thought would be possible. We would never think of the economies of various states and municipalities being almost completely shut down. And as a result of those government policies putting into effect shutdowns, lockdowns, and what have you that are preventing much economic activity from happening, that's not the responsibility, that's not the fault of those workers that are being set aside or those businesses that are being set aside. And so providing some relief is absolutely important. But the question I have is this bill more structured as a relief measure, or is it more structured as a stimulus package? Because I see both terms used by the media and by politicians all about how would you label it?
Yeah, so there's a component of this that actually is intended as a stimulus, and that's a piece actually we haven't talked about yet. This numbers are still being worked out, but there will be $1,000 checks, possibly more, distributed to adults and children across this country in the form of a stimulus. That'll phase out. Once you hit about $75,000 as somebody who's single, you're actually not likely to see a dime of that. But that's intended to be a stimulus. We at the Heritage Foundation have actually been advising against this component, not because we're against helping people, but that money would go to everyone, even folks like myself. If let's say I'm working remotely, I'm working at home, which thankfully I'm able to do. Why is the government going to borrow $1,000 to put in my checking account? I'm not the one who's directly impacted by this and unemployed. I said, I'm all for helping the unemployed and helping businesses get through this in the programs we talked before. But to go ahead and just helicopter money to everybody, that puts us in debt. It might help people be more favorably inclined to vote for you, but that should never be the purpose of a government program. And number two, we have situations where we have governments telling people, in many cases this is rational, telling them we need you to stay home for a while, social distance, we want to contain the spread of this virus. But on the other hand, we're going to go ahead and deposit money in their checking accounts trying to stimulate them to actually leave the house.
How can you stimulate? If you're not allowing the economy to function, Joe Griffith, I've been saying this, there's nothing to stimulate at this point in time. Yeah. But the other thing is, so this bill, it looks like it's shaping up where this UBI, Universal Basic Income, is not, that it would be universal. It's not going to be means tested. And basically, at least for a period of time, Andrew Yang gets to claim victory in 2020.
Well, on this, though, there was a lot of pushback, and they will be phasing out those checks based on income. So it looks like to be, if you make, once you hit $75,000, somebody who's single, it phases out. And if you're married, once you get to about that $150,000 level, it also phases out. So, and it's also not going to be into perpetuity where this is going to last for a year. So Andrew Yang probably should hold off on celebrating just yet.
All right, so Joe Griffith, let's kind of assess this. We got good, bad, ugly. Net, at this point, is this a bill that we just have to swallow and say, okay, they can't wait any longer. It's bad in so many ways, but we need to provide some sort of relief, so pass the darn thing?
Well, we can back up really quick to the ugly part. I think
sure. Please, yes,
part,
absolutely. Go ahead. Joe, let's zoom right in on you as you go into the ugly part.
There's a portion of this that would basically provide seed money for the Federal Reserve to go ahead and start directly lending to consumers and to businesses. That is a big departure from the past. Typically, you have the Fed. They might go ahead and lend to financial institutions or provide liquidity in the marketplace, but you don't see the Federal Reserve actually making loans directly to non-financial companies or to consumers. I think we need to take a deep pause, a deep breath before going that direction. The Federal Reserve, as I mentioned before, has taken a lot of positive actions to ensure that we have liquidity in the marketplace. That is their job. But this bill would actually enable them to go far beyond that and move beyond just liquidity to making loans. So that could add up to more than $1 trillion of additional money circulating and having, we're talking about SBA, the Small Business Administration. At least that's on the books. At least it's transparent. At least there's a modicum of accountability that we can hold our legislators to. But once you move that from the SBA and from the federal government to the Federal Reserve, there's a lot less accountability. We need to be very cautious. But to your point about whether or not legislators should pass the bill, at the Heritage Foundation, we don't say one way or the other, pass this, don't pass it. We try to provide analysis, and that's what I've tried to do is show the good, show the bad, show the ugly. But I think that we can all agree we want to see solutions brought forward to go ahead and minimize the economic damage and help us move beyond this.
One more question about the policies being taken. You have said that the Federal Reserve, has taken some good steps, and I think that some of these, such as the discount window, opening that up to banks and so forth that need more cash flowing in to be able to be a little more liquid, I think that's important to keep in mind. But what I'm concerned about has been this restoration of quantitative easing, that is to say, buying up a lot more of mortgage-backed securities and treasuries like we saw in the aftermath of the financial crisis as well. Also, the rate cuts, I don't see that as particularly valuable. I don't think that that's going to have much of an impact on the economy. While there are some things the Fed has done that I think could be beneficial, those are two things not so much. What do you make of that, Joe Griffith of the Heritage Foundation?
Yeah, on liquidity side, I think that was a good thing for the Federal Reserve to do. I think there's a lot of misinformation about the interest rate side. I think longer term, these machinations have a limited effect on economic growth. But what we have seen over the years is the Federal Reserve actually paying banks to hold back excess reserves at the Fed, and they'll pay those banks money for those reserves. And so think about that. If you're a bank, let's say you've got $1 million, you could choose to either lend that out to a borrower, and there's always that risk involved. The borrower might not repay, or you can park that $1 million risk-free at the Federal Reserve and they'll pay you interest on that. Well, you are going to be slightly more inclined, all things being equal, to keep that money parked at the Federal Reserve rather than lend it out. So what the Federal Reserve did over the past few weeks is lower the interest that they're paying to those banks to keep those funds in the digital vaults at the Fed. So that's a positive thing during this time because there is that extra demand on the part of business and consumers for credit to get them through that. So that's great. But like you said, we've got a situation where businesses are closed, factories aren't producing. Really, this is more a problem of the virus. We need to contain this, and we need to allow people to get back to work when it's safe. That's what will really bring us out of this economic contraction.
Joel Griffith, final question, and I want to play cut 8 to sort of set the stage for this. This is a couple of days ago. I think it might have been over the weekend. Steve Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary, asked about the prospect of this recession or whatever we're in right now. Yeah, it was Fox News Sunday, this past Sunday. Continuing on what the economic environment could be, and let's take a listen to this, and then I'll pose my question.
Are we currently, Mr. Secretary, in a recession?
I think that's a technical question that in this situation is not terribly relevant. Are we going to have reduced economic activity this quarter? Absolutely. I think next quarter, a lot depends on how quickly the curve of the medical situation works. But, when people focus on recessions, it's normally because of a prolonged economic environment. This is a very unique situation that we've never had before. This is the government has self-imposed shutting down large parts of the economy. And as soon as we can get the medical situation under control, we're going to reopen it. And to the extent we've kept all these small businesses in business, we've kept workers with them, when we reopen the economy is going to bounce back significantly.
Obviously, this economy has been very strong. We were seeing wage gains finally starting to rise. We saw unemployment at record lows in community after community, very great positivity in the economy. Then this hits suddenly. And so a two-part question for you, Joel Griffith, again, of the Heritage Foundation, before we let you go. Part one, do you think we're in a recession at this point? Some people are saying it, but technically a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth or a contraction in the economy, negative GDP. And number two, how quickly do you think we can bounce back from this economically, especially if this doesn't drag on for, shall we say, too long?
Yeah, the jury is out whether or not we are going to see 2 consecutive quarters of economic contraction. That's what you need to have a recession. But what we do know is that people, regardless of whether or not we have 2 quarters of this or not, we know that people are suffering now. You probably have friends. I know I have friends that have already been laid off in the first 2 weeks of this. That pain is real. And that's why it's so imperative that we continue to work the policy side to minimize that pain where we can and do it in as fiscally responsible manner as possible. Whether or not we can turn this corner quickly, that depends on really whether or not this virus can be contained quickly enough in a way in which many of us can go ahead and get back to work. Because look, even if you can go ahead and receive 100% of your former pay on unemployment, people want to work, and people want to add value to society, and adding value is the only way in which we can really return to growth. The bailouts alone won't do it. The bailouts are really a Band-Aid. Even if it's necessary to have that Band-Aid, we need to get back to health. So that's what I'm hoping. We can contain this, and we can move on as quickly as possible in a safe manner.
Joe Griffith, research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Great conversation. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads to dissect this bill that really does have good, bad, and ugly to it. Thanks for your insights today.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Once again, Joe Griffith joining us here on the show. Great to talk with folks at the Heritage Foundation, one of America's leading conservative organizations, especially think tanks. And you look at some of the policies that have been instituted under President Trump, a lot of them do dovetail in with what the Heritage Foundation has been making recommendations on. Unfortunately, I would say not quite enough in this particular bill, the CARES Act, which I do expect to pass the United States Senate today and the House in the coming couple of days, and then eventually to get onto President Trump's desk. Just a final word here before we call it a day, and that is we need to keep our chins up, keep it going, because this is a tough time, but we will persevere economically and socially, culturally. The United States of America can and will move forward with this. I think at this point, you just have to swallow the pill if you're in D.C. and approve this bill, but under normal circumstances, if there weren't so many Americans just absolutely struggling by this because of the government, because of their actions, I would say no. But it does seem like you probably have to swallow it and take the medicine here and just get this economy opened once again at the earliest possible time. Don't do it prematurely, but make sure that we have an eye on the prize of getting people back to work and not just being on the government dole. And then once these policies go into effect, don't allow them to continue. Make sure they are temporary. And make sure that there isn't the impetus for politicians to go back to these types of things that are contained in the CARES Act moving forward. Because it isn't a bill that we should look to and say, oh, this is a great guiding point. It's terrible. In more ways, it is terrible than it is good, but at the same time, American people market so unsettled, you might just have to go ahead and swallow that pill, take the medicine, so to speak, and pass the CARES Act. I don't know, though. It is one of those tough things. You look at it for the reasons we were talking about with Joe Griffith, and you have to say, damn, this is a Hobson's choice in many ways. All right, that is it for us today. Once again, I am Jimmy Sengenberger, here, your host on Jimmy at the Crossroads, in partnership with our friends at the Washington Examiner. We will be back tomorrow as well with more engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, as we work hard day in and day out to make sense of nonsense. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day. And as I always like to say, may God bless America.